Okay, so let's check some basic modeling techniques, and maybe let's start with surfaces where we have our open, closed lines. So let's start with a closed line, and let's just draw some basic shape. We're not modeling here anything specific, just anything really. So once we finish, we don't have to try to close the loop carefully. Shade will do it for us if we have selected the closed line. And now by pressing Alt and dragging, we just duplicated it and we put it into a curved surface group, which creates the model. Basically it fills the space between the first and the second line, right? So let's just change their placement. So the bottom line is at the bottom, the top line is on top. And now let's duplicate the top line and then drag it outside of this group. And you see what happens. It basically creates a lid because it's no longer a part of this group. And now let's do the same at the bottom. And you can see now we have like a closed shape essentially, where we have two lids, so to speak, and then this filled surface in the middle. And now we can put the whole thing into just a regular group, right? So basically this is the way you can work with lines if you want to use them for modeling various objects in your scene. Now there's another way you can close the gap. It's by basically duplicating the top line and then choosing the generate to point. It will basically close it. Now here we have to adjust our top line a little bit because you can see it sort of intersect here. So let's just move those points a little bit. And we will do something like this the bottom here as well. So here is our top line, which is generated to just one point. Then we have the initial line, and here is the bottom line. So let's duplicate the bottom line as well. And while having it selected, again, we choose the generate to point, and it sort of closes the gap. So this is another way you can create this kind of solid object, this time keeping everything within a group. And then you can modify it however you want. Right? You can see now that by clicking on this horizontal lines, we choose open lines. By clicking on this vertical, it switches into closed lines. So it happens automatically. You can choose to do it. You can right click and select switch like I've just done. And then it will change the direction basically from open to closed and vice versa. And so this is the switch button. But you can just do it manually basically. And that's how you can start modeling using curved surfaces. Okay, so now let's create something else. This time let's go to open line and let's create some sort of a shape that we will revolve and start modeling that way. So here we have the shape. We go to revolve and then we click and drag along the axis along which we want to revolve it. So we dragged it a little bit upwards. It revolved around y-axis. And we have our revolved open line. And so this is our shape. And again, this shape, since it's only revolved along this one long curved line, we only have those points along the line that we can modify. Right? As you can see, we can't select anything else, but we can select and tweak the points of the line that we've created and basically do whatever we want. So we can change the shape however we want. just like this, just by clicking and dragging it. Right, so we can deform it, we can tweak it however we want, but it still remains this revolved line. So and you can see here in our info tab we have begin and end as a full circle, so to speak, 360 degrees, and we can change it if we don't want it to be revolved completely, right, fully 360. We can put a different angle. We can put 200, for instance, and we can go back to the full circle. Right, so this is another way we can create a number of objects using the revolve option. Now we can double click here on the name. Let's rename it to surfaces. Okay, so we have these two for now. Now let's see what we can create next. Okay, maybe let's create an open line, but this time we're not gonna revolve it. We'll start, again, we will duplicate it by holding Alt and drag. We select both lines and we put them into a curved surface group. So again, we have faces created automatically. And now let's modify it a little bit. Let's add lines. Basically by going to modify surface add point, I have it as a shortcut. I'm just pressing U key and it allows me to add additional points. Basically you just click and drag across one of the lines and it will add automatically another, like a loop. So that way you can add more lines to your object, to your surface, and start modifying it, start tweaking it. Let's, for example, round the edge here. If we select one of the edges, click round edge, and then start dragging here across the screen, it will start smoothing it. So this way you can smooth the angle if your object is too angular, for instance, or you can go bevel edge, which will basically, it acts the same way, but it creates more angular surface, as you can see. And so this is useful if you want to create some, I don't know, very hard surface looking objects, perhaps. All right, so, and as you can see, it's all open lines, which we can, now here you can see what an important thing. If you're operating with lines, you can see what happens, right? We duplicated the line, but it's below the top one. So we have to revert the order. We have to reverse the way they are in a browser. Otherwise, it's not going to be modeling correctly. It will look like it does, but it doesn't. So here the hierarchy of those lines is very important. Now, if we drag and duplicate at the top, which are the lines here at the bottom of our browser, you see there is no problem, because every new line is created beneath the previous one, so that order is preserved. So this is something you have to keep in mind. Right, as you can see here, also no problem. We can keep dragging, but if we select this line and drag and duplicate, you see what happens. It looks correct, but this line is in fact beneath the initial one. So once we start moving it around, you see what happens, right? So we have to drag and move it on top, and now we're good. Right? So this is something to keep in mind if you start modeling with open lines and then start modifying, duplicating. You have to make sure that the order is preserved. And otherwise, you may run into trouble later on, and you may find out that suddenly, oh, something like this happens, right? If you suddenly start moving or deleting the lines, basically the order of them, the flow will be messed up, and your model will get messed up. And so this is something to keep in mind here if you decide to model with open lines. Okay. All right, so you can see now the order is correct, everything is fine. Okay, so these are just a few basic techniques that we can use lines and surfaces. Now let's take a look at some polygons. So modeling with polygons is pretty much similar to any other software out there. So if we start with a box, let's say, once we have it created, we can then select faces. We basically switch between object mode, which is the mode that we have the entire thing, or modify mode, in which we select faces, edges, and vertices. Right? So object and modify mode, it's good to have them assigned to different hotkeys, so you can quickly switch between one and the other. Or you can use this top icons. Let's add maybe a couple of loops. Okay. So to do this, again, I use a shortcut. If you want to do it, using the menu here, you go to modify and loop slice. And so this is standard, sort of one of the standard modeling tools. So let's just add a couple of slices. Now maybe let's extrude something. So let's select here a polygon, and again, it's very convenient if you want to extrude. You can use a proper command for this, but you can also just Alt and drag the arrow and it will extrude automatically. So if you like this kind of modeling, like a box modeling based on just extrusions, then Shade is super fast to model, because you literally don't have to do anything. You just Alt and drag and you can build the whole object just like that. So this is very convenient. Let's see. Well, we can also, what else we can do? We can bevel. So beveling is sort of similar, but then you can tweak it just like that. As long as the tool is active, you can make it wider, you can make it narrower. And as you can see here in tool parameters, we have different options, right? If you select more than one face, you can extrude them. You can just duplicate and make a copy. You can bevel it, which means that they will not be combined, they will not be connected. They will be sort of extruded along the normals, right? So you can keep changing it depending on what your intentions are. Okay, what else we can do here? Well, maybe let's add something else. Let's use this time a mesh rectangle, which is just a flat polygon, and which we can now, for instance, add thickness to. So we can choose thickness, and again, you just click and drag to add thickness to it. Okay, we can subdivide, of course. If we select the face, we can go to subdivide, and here we can choose a number of levels. If we choose 4, it subdivides 4 times. You can also change it here in tool parameters. Again, you have subdivisions, and you can make as many as you want, like even this many. Of course, it creates this so-called n-gons, but for just a design purpose, for instance, that doesn't really matter much. Shade will handle it very well. It will render everything. There won't be any problems. Of course, if you're modeling for games or something, that may be a problem, but that's a different story. We can preview subdivision for the whole thing, for smoothing the entire mesh. If we want to subdivide the entire surface, and you can actually model like this by then just using this like a bounding box, this cage as a reference, where actual vertices, where actual points still are. So the menu for this is right here, right? Subdivision surface, and the most commonly used is open subdiv, which as you can see, I have it as a shortcuts V and C, so I can keep switching back and forth between the non-subdivided and subdivided. And if you select it, if you turn on this preview of subdivision, you can go to the info tab, and here actually you can change the method. So different methods, there are 3 different methods, and each of them gives slightly different results. Some of them you can tweak, like this one, for instance. You can change the weight, so basically like a degree of this subdivision. The last one, again, is a little bit different. It sort of tries to fill this cage, this bounding box, as closely as possible, right, as you can see. So it looks a bit different. So it really depends on your preference. Yeah, so you can tweak it. And then if you want it, if you want sort of subdivided this way, again, you convert it to mesh, you pick the level of subdivision and confirm, and it sort of subdivides it. And well, now it's subdivided, like it's not a preview anymore, it's actually the geometry. And you can of course keep going further and further. You can again subdivide this already subdivided one and again turn it into another even denser mesh. So you can go and make it smoother and smoother. Of course, you have to be mindful of the number of polygons. Okay, now let's take a look quickly at the work plane, which if you have ever used Modo, should be pretty familiar with. It's exactly the same thing. What it is, and you can choose a mode of it up here, whether it is facing the screen, auto, or along certain axis. What it is, it allows you to model along the normals of a selected face of your model. So for instance, if we, let's modify this a little bit here. Let's select edge. And yeah, so for example, if we want to model along the normals of this face, we select the face, then go here and choose create local axis. And you can see it's going to snap the work plane to this face. So now whatever you model is going to go along the normals if we will, for example, exclude it. And we have this axis temporary here in the browser. And to cancel this, again, go to this corner and choose global. All right. It will by default snap to X, Y, and you can then change it, for example, back to auto if you want. All right, so this is pretty handy. You can leave it on or you can turn it off. I usually turn it off, but that's, of course, personal preference. And one more thing, let me show you how you can also model in a bit different way by using a memorize option. So in order to do that, let's, for example, create a very simple object here. It's just an open line. Let's round its edges a little bit. And so basically we just select each corner and go with round edge. And now that we have it, let's create something that we can sweep along it. So maybe let's create a small circle. All right, anywhere is okay. Okay, and now let's press Shift and turn it precisely 90 degrees. And our disk, well, let's convert it into line object. So it will change it into a closed line. So we have an open line and closed line. Now our open line, let's click here and memorize it. You can see it's emphasized. It's like this thicker white line now. And we're gonna use this alignment window. Let's choose here a front. So we will focus on our front view. Now let's select our closed line, right, which is this small circle, and click here this button above update. So it's gonna snap into the beginning of our open line. So this is pretty useful. Again, another way you can use this alignment menu. So now that we have it at the beginning of our path, let's go and click sweep that we have here in our parameters. And as you can see, it just automatically sweeps, creating this whole bunch of closed lines and putting them all in a group. So now we can clear this memorized line, and basically we're done.